The silence in Dr. Elara Vance's office was a living thing, thick and syrupy, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic ticking of the minimalist clock on her wall and the faint, shuddering breath of the young woman sitting opposite her. Maya, a graphic designer with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a habit of twisting the silver ring on her thumb, was in the throes of it again. Relationship anxiety. Elara could see the familiar specters dancing in her gaze, the fear of abandonment, the hypervigilance for signs of disinterest, the catastrophic interpretations of a delayed text message. "He said he had to work late," Maya whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. "And my mind it went there. To the worst place. That he's lying. That he's with someone else. That the sound of his key in the door will be the prelude to him leaving me." Elara leaned forward, her posture a carefully calibrated blend of empathy and professionalism. "And when that thought arrived, Maya, the what if he's lying, what did you feel? In your body?" "A fist," Maya said immediately, pressing a hand to her solar plexus. "A cold, hard fist right here. And then the noise. The static in my head." Elara nodded. She knew that static. Intimately. It was the white noise of 1,000 fears, the soundtrack to a heart perpetually braced for impact. For the past 5 years, she had built a career, a reputation, a whole identity around guiding others through that very noise. Her book, The Secure Within, sat on shelves in apartments all over the city, a beacon of calm for the romantically terrified. She was the steady hand, the rational voice, the one who could deconstruct a panic attack with the precision of a watchmaker. What her patients, her readers, didn't know was that her expertise was born not from some innate serenity, but from a lifetime of being a prisoner in her own anxious mind. She was a cartographer who had learned to map the treacherous terrain by getting lost in it, over and over again. An hour later, the session concluded, Elara walked Maya to the door, offering a final, grounding reassurance. "Remember, the thought is just a thought. It's not a prophecy. Your work is to observe it, to feel the sensation, and to let it pass without building a story around it." Maya offered a fragile smile. "Thank you, Dr. Vance. I'll try." The door clicked shut, and the professional calm on Elara's face dissolved like sugar in hot water. She was alone. The silence was no longer therapeutic, it was accusatory. She walked to the large window of her downtown office, looking down at the ant-like bustle of the city. Her own words echoed in her head, sounding hollow, like advice given by a ghost. Her phone buzzed on the desk. The text from David. "Running late. Dinner with the partners. Don't wait up." A simple, benign message. A statement of fact. And yet, Elara felt the cold fist Maya had described, clenching in her own stomach. The static began to hum. Dinner with the partners. Which partners? Was it just business? Was she there? The new junior associate, all sharp wit and effortless confidence, who David had mentioned with a little too much admiration last week. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She could ask. A simple, "No problem, hope it goes well." Who all is there? Casual. Unassuming. But she knew the cascade that would follow. She would dissect his response time, his word choice, his use of punctuation. A period could feel like a full stop on their entire relationship. An exclamation point could feel forced, a lie told with excessive enthusiasm. This was her life. A renowned expert on relationship anxiety, perpetually one unverified thought away from her own private earthquake. The irony was a bitter pill she swallowed daily. She couldn't do it. She couldn't sit in this pristine, silent office, surrounded by the artifacts of her own supposed wisdom and spiral. She grabbed her coat. The city park was her refuge. A sprawling expanse of manicured lawns, ancient oaks, and winding paths, it was the one place where she didn't have to be Dr. Elara Vance. She could just be Elara, a woman with a restless heart, walking until the sharp edges of her fear wore down. Today, the walking wasn't enough. The static was too loud. She found an empty bench, partially hidden by the weeping branches of a willow tree, its long tendrils brushing the grass like gentle fingers. She sat, the cold of the wrought iron seeping through her wool coat. She dropped her head into her hands, the professional facade crumbling completely. The tears came then, hot and silent, a release of the pressure that had been building for weeks, for months, for a lifetime. "It's a particular kind of hell, isn't it?" a voice said, quiet and low, from beside her. Elara jerked her head up, hastily wiping her cheeks. She hadn't heard anyone approach. A man was sitting on the far end of the bench. He was perhaps in his late 30s, with a kind of unkempt elegance. Dark, curly hair that looked as if it had been frequently run through by anxious hands, and eyes that held a startling depth of perception. They were the color of warm amber, and they regarded her not with pity, but with a strange, weary kinship. "I'm sorry," Elara stammered, her therapist's voice automatically engaging. "I didn't see you there." "You were occupied," he said, his voice a rich, melodic baritone. It was a voice made for saying meaningful things, for singing in the dark. He gestured vaguely towards the space in front of them. "The particular hell of knowing your fear is probably irrational, but being utterly powerless to stop the cinema in your head from playing the worst-case scenario on a loop." Elara stared at him. He had articulated the core of her existence with an accuracy that was both unsettling and deeply relieving. "Something like that," she said, her guard lowering a fraction. "My name's Leo," he said, offering a small, lopsided smile. "Elara." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the distant laughter of children and the rustle of the willow leaves. "Is it work?" Leo asked gently. "Or the other thing?" And something in Elara broke. Perhaps it was the anonymity. Perhaps it was the raw, unvarnished empathy in his eyes. Perhaps it was simply that she had been the strong one for so many people for so long, and she was desperately, profoundly tired. "The other thing," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a hushed, frantic torrent. "It's my partner, David. He's a good man. A successful lawyer. Stable. Reliable. I am a walking, talking factory of doubt. He texts he's working late, and my mind constructs an entire affair. He's quiet at dinner, and I'm convinced he's planning his exit strategy. I've written a book on this, for God's sake. I help people with this exact problem. And I'm a fraud. A complete and utter fraud." She told him everything. The constant vigilance, the need for reassurance, the way she would pick apart every conversation, every gesture, looking for the hidden meaning, the proof of her own unlovability. She spoke of the exhausting performance of being the calm, secure partner when inside, she was a ship being tossed on a sea of her own making. She poured her heart out to a stranger on a park bench, and he just listened. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't try to fix her. He just nodded, his amber eyes absorbing her pain, reflecting an understanding so profound it felt like absolution. When she finally fell silent, spent and empty, he didn't speak for a long time. He just looked out at the pond, where ducks were gliding serenely. "You're not a fraud," he said finally, his voice firm. "You're wounded. There's a world of difference. A mechanic's car can break down. A doctor can get sick. It doesn't invalidate their knowledge. It just makes them human." He turned to look at her, and his gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. "The work you do, it's not about being immune to the fear. It's about learning to build a home for yourself inside the storm. It sounds to me like you're an expert architect for others, but you're still living in a tent in your own emotional hurricane." Tears welled in Elara's eyes again, but this time, they were tears of recognition. He saw her. Truly saw her. How do you know all this?" she whispered. Leo gave a sad, gentle smile. "Let's just say I've spent a lot of my life writing songs about the human heart. You learn to recognize the chords of sorrow, the rhythm of anxiety. They're universal." He glanced at his watch, a faint look of regret crossing his features. "I have to go. But thank you for your honesty. It's a rare and beautiful thing." He stood up, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate, as if he wanted to say more. Then he simply nodded, turned, and walked away, his figure quickly swallowed by the shadows of the gathering dusk. Elara sat on the bench for a long time, the cold forgotten. The static in her head was gone, replaced by a strange, resonant quiet. She felt lighter, as if she had set down a burden she'd been carrying for years. She looked down at her hands, and for the first time all day they were still. The encounter with Leo played in Elara's mind for the rest of the week, a haunting, beautiful melody she couldn't shake. His words, "You're wounded. There's a world of difference," had disarmed her more effectively than any therapy session or self-help book ever had. She found herself replaying the conversation, the timbre of his voice, the startling clarity in his amber eyes. She tried to explain the shift to David over a dinner of takeout Thai, a dinner where he was present, engaged, telling her funny stories about his day. "I had a breakthrough today," she ventured, pushing a piece of broccoli around her plate. "Oh," David said, taking a sip of wine. "With a patient?" "In a way. For myself, I realized that my anxiety isn't a moral failing. It's a wound. And I need to stop treating it like an enemy to be defeated and more like a frightened child that needs compassion." David chewed thoughtfully. "That sounds very wise, honey. From your book, right?" A small, cold needle pricked at her heart. "Something like that," she said, the lightness she'd felt seeping away. He hadn't really hurt her. He'd just filed it under Elara's work stuff. He was a good man, a kind man, but he navigated the world with the straightforward logic of contracts and case law. The shadowy, labyrinthine geography of her inner world was a foreign country to him, one he had no desire to visit. Later that night, as David slept soundly beside her, Elara lay awake, the old fears creeping back in. Was his stability just a form of emotional laziness? Was his inability to truly see her a sign that he didn't truly love her? The static began to hum. She fought it, clutching Leo's words like a talisman. Build a home inside the storm. The next day, a new patient, a young man named Ben, was describing his fear of intimacy. "It's like I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop," he said, echoing a sentiment she'd heard 1,000 times. Instead of her usual cognitive behavioral techniques, Elara found herself saying, "Ben, what if, instead of waiting for the shoe to drop, you just acknowledge that you're in a room with a lot of shoes? Some might drop. Most won't. But your anxiety is about trying to control which ones fall and when. What if you just let the shoes be?" Ben blinked. "Just let the shoes be?" "It's about making space for the uncertainty," Elara said, feeling a surge of genuine conviction. "The fear isn't the problem. Your war with the fear is the problem." It was a subtle shift, but it felt monumental. She was no longer just parroting a methodology. She was speaking from a place of hard-won and very recent insight. That evening, needing to hold onto the feeling, she decided to go for a run in the same park. Her feet carried her almost unconsciously towards the willow tree and the bench. It was empty. A part of her was relieved. Another part, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, was disappointed. She was about to turn back when she saw it. A small, smooth, gray river stone was sitting precisely in the center of the bench. There was nothing remarkable about it, except for its deliberate placement. On a whim, she picked it up. It felt cool and solid in her palm. A grounding object. She slipped it into her pocket. Over the next fortnight, the stone became her anchor. When the static started, she would hold it, its solidity a physical reminder of that moment of connection, of being truly seen. Her work with patients grew richer, more intuitive. She was still anxious, the old patterns didn't vanish overnight, but something had fundamentally changed. She had given herself permission to be a work in progress. She told no one about Leo. He was her secret, a beautiful, mysterious interlude that belonged only to her. One Saturday, she was browsing in a dusty, beloved independent record store, a place she went to when she needed to feel the tactile presence of art. She was flipping through the vinyl in the folk/rock section, her fingers trailing over faded album covers, when she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. There he was. Staring back at her from a minimalist, black and white cover was Leo. His dark, curly hair was more tamed, but the eyes were unmistakable. Those deep, perceptive amber eyes, filled with a soulful melancholy. The album title was scrawled in a familiar, looping script, The Quiet War. The artist's name, Leo Kane. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. The Leo Kane. She knew the name, of course. He was a critically acclaimed singer-songwriter, known for his brutally honest, emotionally eviscerating lyrics. He wasn't a pop star, he was a musician's musician, an artist who sold out concert halls not with spectacle, but with the raw power of his words and his haunting, gravel and velvet voice. He was famous for his privacy, for his songs that felt like pages torn from a private diary. She bought the album, her hands trembling. She rushed home, ignoring David's call from the kitchen, and locked herself in her study. She put the vinyl on her turntable, the crackle and pop a prelude to the earthquake that was coming. The first track, Fault Lines, began with a single, mournful acoustic guitar. Then his voice, that same baritone that had spoken to her on the bench, filled the room. You build your life on solid ground, a fortress against the sound slash of the tremors deep beneath your feet, a rhythm of defeat, slash but the fault lines run right through us, love, a map of all we're scared of slash and the smallest shift can tear the world in two. Elara sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face. It was all there. The entire lexicon of anxiety. The next song, Static, was a perfect, poetic description of the noise in her head. Another, The Architect, spoke of building walls and the loneliness inside them. He hadn't just been a kind stranger. He was a chronicler of the human soul's fragile battles. His insight wasn't just personal intuition, it was his life's work, distilled into melody and verse. The man who had seen right through her was a man who saw right through everyone. The intimacy she had felt, the profound connection, was it real? Or was he just a master collector of broken pieces, using them for his art? She felt a dizzying wave of betrayal, followed immediately by a crushing sense of her own insignificance. Of course. She was just another source material, another sad story on a park bench. The beautiful, sacred moment was suddenly tawdry, exposed. The record spun on, his voice weaving a tapestry of pain and beauty, but Elara could no longer hear it. She was back in the storm, and the home she had started to build felt like it had been swept away. The following Monday, Elara was a ghost in her own life. She went through the motions with her patients, but the newfound authenticity was gone, replaced by a brittle, professional shell. She had texted David, telling him she wasn't feeling well and was going to bed early. Instead, she was sitting in the dark of her study, the river stone cold in her hand, listening to the quiet war for the 5th time. Each listen was a form of self-flagellation. She was dissecting the lyrics, finding echoes of her own confession in every line. A song about a professional liar felt like a direct hit. A ballad about unraveling in the light of a stranger made her cheeks burn with humiliation. Her phone lit up with a notification. It was a music news alert she'd subscribed to years ago and mostly ignored. Breaking, Leo Kane announces intimate solo tour, The Bare Bones, following 3-year hiatus. Her thumb moved on its own, clicking the link. There was a short article and a list of dates. And there it was. Her city, the Grand Old Orpheum Theater. In 2 weeks. A wild, reckless thought, entirely out of character, took root in her mind. She had to go. She had to see him. She had to what? Confront him? Thank him? She didn't know. She only knew that the thread that had been spun on that park bench was not yet severed, and if she didn't pull on it, it would haunt her forever. She bought a ticket. A single seat in the front row. The 2 weeks were an agony of suspense. She was distant with David, who attributed it to her not feeling well. She was distracted at work. The only thing that felt real was the looming date at the Orpheum. The night of the concert, she dressed simply, in a dark dress, feeling like she was walking to her own execution or her own resurrection, she wasn't sure which. The Orpheum was packed, a hushed, reverent crowd filling the plush velvet seats. The air was thick with anticipation. When the house lights dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated the center of the stage, the applause was thunderous. And there he was. Leo Kane. He walked to the stool, picked up his worn acoustic guitar, and sat down. He looked older than on the park bench, more defined by the stage lights, but the essence was the same. "Good evening," he said, his voice a warm, familiar wave that washed over the crowd. He played a few of his older, well-known songs, and the audience sang along in whispered reverence. Elara sat perfectly still, her hands clenched in her lap. After a particularly heartbreaking ballad, he paused, tuning his guitar. The stage was silent. "I took some time away," he said, his voice conversational, as if he were speaking to each person individually. "I think I'd forgotten how to listen. I got lost in the noise of, well, everything." He looked out into the darkness, and for a fleeting second, Elara could have sworn his gaze landed on her. "You can get so good at writing about pain that you forget to actually feel it. You become a spectator to your own life." He strummed a soft, new chord progression. "I wrote this one recently. It's not on an album yet. It's about a moment of grace. About being reminded what it's like to be truly seen." He began to sing. "Willow branches, evening light / a professional heart, losing its fight, / you poured your truth out on the bench between us, a flood of fractured trust, / and you called yourself a fraud, with the world hanging on your every word, / you showed me the cracks in your porcelain soul, and for a moment, I felt whole, / because your war was a quiet one, a battle I thought only I had fought and won, / you gave me back the melody, the one I'd lost, you see." Elara stopped breathing. The song was about her. It was their conversation, rendered in his beautiful, aching poetry. He hadn't exploited her pain, he had been moved by it. He had been as lost as she was, and their meeting had been a mutual rescue. The lyrics spoke not of collection, but of recognition. He saw his own reflection in her tears. The song ended, not with a dramatic crescendo, but with a final, soft chord that faded into a perfect, stunned silence. And then the applause erupted, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the theater. Leo looked up, his eyes scanning the front row. They found Elara's. He didn't smile. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, a silent acknowledgement that passed between them like a secret handshake. "I see you. I remember." The rest of the concert passed in a blur for Elara. When the final encore was over and the house lights came up, she felt dazed. The crowd began to file out, but she remained in her seat, glued to the velvet, her mind reeling. An usher approached her. "Miss? We need to clear the theater." Elara nodded numbly and stood. As she turned to leave, the usher held out a small, sealed envelope. "This is for you." Her name was written on the front in the same looping script as the album cover. Elara. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. Inside was a single piece of heavy, cream-colored paper. The message was short. Asterisk, the bench. Tomorrow. 4 p.m. If you're willing. L. The next 24 hours were the longest of Elara's life. She wrestled with 1,000 doubts. It was madness. He was a famous musician. She was a therapist with a partner at home. This was the plot of a silly romance novel, not her life. But beneath the fear was a current of something else, something she hadn't felt in years, certainty. The certainty that she needed to see this through. She told David she had a late patient. A lie. The first of many, or the last one ever. She didn't know. At 3:55 p.m., she stood before the willow tree. Her heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. He was already there, sitting on the same end of the bench, dressed in simple, dark jeans and a jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He looked up as she approached. "You came," he said. His voice was softer than it had been on stage, closer to the voice she remembered. "I came," she replied, sitting down, leaving a careful foot of space between them. They sat in silence, the ghost of their first conversation hovering between them. "I heard your song," she said finally. "Last night." "I know," he said. "I saw you. You used my pain for your art." She meant it to sound like an accusation, but it came out as a question. Leo turned to her, pulling off his cap. His eyes were earnest. "No. I honored our moment with my art. There's a difference. What you told me, it didn't feel like just your pain, Elara. It felt like the pain. The human one. The one I've been trying to articulate my whole life. You gave it a face, a name. It shook me out of a 3-year creative block. It shook me out of a lot of things." He looked down at his hands. "When I sat here that day, I was as lost as you felt. The music had stopped being true. It was just a product. I was wandering, trying to remember what real connection felt like. And then this brilliant, beautiful, wounded woman sat down and offered me her truth, without filter, without pretense. You thought you were breaking down. I saw you being more real than anyone I'd met in a decade. You weren't my subject, Elara. You were my mirror. Tears filled Elara's eyes, but they were clean tears, tears of understanding. He was right. She had felt it too, the mutual recognition. The stone, she asked, pulling it from her pocket. A genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. A placeholder. A promise that the bench wouldn't always be empty. They talked then, for hours, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the park lights flickered on. He told her about the suffocating nature of fame, the pressure to be the emotionally insightful musician, the loneliness of being a confessional writer who never truly confessed to anyone. She told him more about her life with David, not with the frantic anxiety of their first meeting, but with a sad, clear-eyed clarity about the chasm of misunderstanding that lay between them. It wasn't a frantic, romantic declaration. It was a deep, soul-level conversation between two people who spoke the same native tongue, the language of the anxious, observant heart. What happens now? Elara whispered into the twilight. I don't know, Leo said honestly. I'm leaving tomorrow for the next city on the tour. And you have a life here. It was the reality check they both needed. This wasn't a fairy tale. There were no easy answers. This, Elara said, gesturing between them, this connection, it's real. It's the most real thing I've felt in years. But I can't build a new life on the ruins of another. I have to face my life. My choices. Leo nodded, his expression a mixture of sadness and profound respect. I wouldn't expect anything less from the woman who wrote The Secure Within. He reached out and for the first time, his hand covered hers. It was warm, solid. This isn't about me stealing you away, Elara. This is about you remembering who you are. You're the architect. Go build your home. Whether it's in your old life or a new one, make sure it has room for all of you, the doctor and the wounded, the strong and the scared. He stood up just as he had the first time. I'll be out there, writing songs. Maybe one of them will be for you. And if your path ever brings you to a place of freedom, you'll know where to find me. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. It was a kiss of benediction, of farewell, of infinite possibility. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Elara sat for a long time, his warmth still on her skin, his words echoing in her soul. She felt a profound sadness, but not a destructive one. It was the sadness of a door closing, and the thrilling, terrifying anticipation of another one opening. She walked home, the city lights blurring through her tears. David was on the sofa, watching a legal drama. How was your patient? He asked, not looking away from the screen. Elara looked at him, really looked at him. He was a good man. But he was not her man. Not anymore. She saw their life together with a devastating clarity. A beautiful, spacious, well-appointed tent in the middle of her hurricane. It was time to build a real home. David, she said, her voice calm, clear, and utterly without static. We need to talk. 1 year later. The launch party for Elara's new book, The Anxious Heart's Anthem, was in full swing at the same independent bookstore where she'd found Leo's album. The room was packed with colleagues, patients, and readers. The book was a radical departure from her first, a more personal, raw, and narrative exploration of love, fear, and the courage to choose authenticity. It was a bestseller. She stood at the podium, giving a short reading. She looked different. Softer, yet stronger. The constant tension around her eyes was gone. The greatest act of courage, she read, is not to vanquish your fear, but to listen to its song. For in its discordant notes, you will often find the first, faint melody of your own true heart, waiting to be sung. After the applause, she signed books for a long line of people. When the last person had left, the store owner handed her a small, flat package. This came for you. Special delivery. There was no return address. Inside was a vinyl record. A test pressing. The sleeve was blank. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, what it was. She went home to her new, small apartment, a home she had built for herself, filled with light and her own things, a home that was sturdy enough to weather any storm. She put the record on. His voice filled the room, even more raw and intimate than before. A year of silence, a year of sound / building my home on solid ground, / the architect of her own peace, a masterpiece that will not cease, / and though we walk on different streets, the melody inside me beats, / a quiet war, a truce, a start, the anthem of a brave, new heart. It was an entire album. The architect's piece. Every song was a letter, a continuation of their conversation. There was longing, but no demand. There was love, but no possession. It was the sound of two people honoring a connection by becoming the best, most whole versions of themselves, separately, yet forever intertwined. Elara sat on the floor of her living room, wrapped in the sound, and she smiled. She was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was finally, joyfully, just letting the shoes be. The static was gone. In its place was a music all her own.